the first John Ford Wayne film that I can remember seeing on a big screen. And this was after seeing maybe few bits and pieces on television, maybe Fort Apache, a little bit of Stagecoach. Maybe I remember dying to see Stagecoach. I was 5 years old and was on a re-release, and I only saw the trailer, but my parents wouldn't take me. It was it was one of those things, and to this day, in my mind, I've never really seen the film, because if I'd seen it then, it would have been something in just embedded in my brains in a way. But the very first one that I saw was The Quiet Man, and it was 1952. I was 10 years old. It was on a Saturday afternoon, Lowe's Theater, 6th Street, 2nd Avenue, and the place was in an uproar. A warm, wild film, very funny, and I must say, visually, one of the most beautiful things ever put on film. I mean, along with that and The Red Shoes and The River, Renoir's The River, it's an extraordinarily beautifully made, beautifully shot film. I understand it was misty and rainy all the time, but boy, did that help, that Technicolor. And a sense of authenticity of the people, of the place, and also a film that's in very, very strong need of restoration right now. Hopefully we can pull that off one of these days. But in any event, it was a very moving experience, but it was a wonderful experience for young people, too. It was full of life, and great deal of humor, and characters that, even though we came from an Italian-American background, we're beginning to feel an affinity with the nature of the Irish and the Irish-American in the films the way John Ford portrayed them. And I mean this also, my parents watching Ford films on TV, watching How Green Was My Valley, for example, was something that was universal in terms of all families, working-class families. This is something that sustained Ford all the way through for me and was a major influence on me because of that. But The Quiet Man is just decidedly Irish. There's no doubt about that. But The Quiet Man is a picture that there are issues with, and you need a whole other show just on that one film.
What's the nature? What do you mean issues?
The way the people behave, and the nature of the taking of the wife, the nature of the battling, the physical conflict between Wayne and O'Hara. But it's all seems to me, which is certainly politically incorrect today, but it all seems to me, dealing with Victor McLaglen, the brother, the sense of honor, sense of dignity, a sense of ritual, from a time and a place, that ultimately she takes that bat, there's a shillelagh, whatever it is, that an old woman gives Wayne to beat her up with, the wife, and at the end she takes it after all the battling is over, she takes it and throws it away. He's not going to touch her. She wins, The beauty about Ford is the dignity of pride, but also the downfall of pride. And you see this, the downfall, the dignity, the good and the bad side of being proud. And you see this beautifully in The Quiet Man. You see it on every character, particularly Victor McLaglen. This whole business of the dowry, this whole business of the Donnybrook that they starred, and people come watch, some sort of ancient ritual in a way that smashes right up against today's concept, especially in America, of how people should behave. And rightly so. The picture has more to do with ritual, has more to do with pride, has more to do with establishing who they are, Wayne and O'Hara as people in that marriage, in that relationship. And of course, there's much more to it. He comes to Ireland, back to the homeland, after this tragedy in the Ring, which was one of the key reasons why I shot Raging Bull in black and white, because there's that wonderful flashback in color, and his trunks are so emerald green, and I said, I can't shoot this thing in color, I just keep thinking of the Ford scene. But that's the first one, and in a funny way, I see, when I think of Wayne, I think more, of course, of, as I say, The Searchers and Red River, but really, the modern Wayne, I think of with that cap and that wonderful tie and the tweeds and that beautiful scene where she pulls him, he pulls her back somehow, there's that wonderful kiss. That wonderful kiss in the wind, and there's something very remarkable about it. I mean, there are issues, other issues too, of course, of the caricatures of the Irish and that sort of thing that is, I'm not qualified to speak about, I don't think. And
what's interesting about that film also too, and I think you already touched on it, was that, Ford was also always bringing to his films the sense of that immigrant experience.
Yeah.
Being a first generation Irish
Yeah.
American.
Now, imagine a Sicilian going back to a small Sicilian village, a Sicilian American. I've done it. I lasted 2 days. Granted, it was a different time. It was 1991. There were some wonderful family members still alive there. My parents are with me. My parents stayed 6 weeks. I stayed 2 days. I felt I belonged, but I really feel, I'm just talking all around the issue now, but I really felt that I was the outsider, but the roots were there. There's no doubt about it. The roots were there. The paranoia, the extraordinary, the paranoia going along. I always mention the negative first. I don't mean that in a bad. I mean that. I should say the positive thing was the family, the sense of the connection with the earth, and that life revolved around. One thinks, idyllically of Arcadia in a way. Arcadia, the land, land giving back life. I saw it there, but I also saw the nature of a small town in Sicily and the dangerous elements that go along with that too, the paranoia, as I say, and that sort of thing. But I felt that with the men in the outside the coffee shop on a Sunday morning, all dressed in black, drinking coffee. No women there. The women were in a different part of the town at that point. I watched my father walk up to 3 or 4 older men, maybe in their 60s, to ask them in Sicilian of 1910, because that's where it stopped in New York. You follow? It's advanced since then in Sicily, but he went up to them and asked them if they knew the house his mother was born in, etc. He gave the name, and he looked like he belonged with them. But nothing had ever changed. Nothing changed. I was different. I was the outsider, but I felt the roots there, and I think to a certain extent you feel that with Wayne. He's looking for that in Quiet Man. He needs those roots, but he's got to prove himself. He's got to prove himself there as being one of them. I can't construct or deconstruct. What's that word they use today? A deconstruction word. I can't analyze what it really means in terms of Irish culture and what Victor McLaughlin's character means. I just know that the sense of pride is something that is deflated in the picture, and ultimately they retain their dignity. O'Hara particularly with Wayne, and I felt very good about the picture.
What is it about the searches that has always had you talk about it so eloquently?
Well, I hope I can talk about it eloquently. I mean, what happened was that it was 3 years later. We had been graduated from the day we were graduated from St. Patrick's Elementary School. Myself and 2 friends of mine went out on a treat, and we were allowed to go out that night alone uptown to a movie theater and see a movie. And we went out. We had a little dinner at a restaurant, a famous restaurant at the time. And so we walked in. And normally, I think, in those days, we just walked in the middle of films. Like I walked in the middle of Vertigo. You just walk in the middle. And then you stay again if you want to see the whole thing, whatever. And so there it is, the Criterion Theater. And there's The Searchers. And it's a John Wayne Western. And we heard that it's pretty good. I don't know if we read reviews at the time, but it was the latest John, when the papers had it there. And it had a sense, a feeling of a vastness to it, we felt, from the ads, a sense of something special. And so we walked in. And there it was. I believe it was only projected in VistaVision in 2 theaters in America, and this was one of them. And I've got to tell you, you never see anything quite like it. Yeah. The VistaVision image on this picture, particularly the wide shots of Monument Valley, and particularly when he shoots the wide shots, and riders enter frame either right slightly below the camera, low angle, on the bottom right or the bottom left. It is phenomenal. It's just phenomenal. You felt you were there. But Monument Valley itself is fascinating because somehow the landscape is like the crooks and the kind of like jagged edges of the psyche in a way, your brain. It lays out. It's like the film ultimately became like this wild, vast psychological epic that the landscape really reflected. And we didn't think of that at the time. We just felt it, particularly if you saw it in VistaVision, because you were placed within there. Those tiny figures in Monument Valley weren't that tiny in VistaVision, but the rocks, the rock formations were big. And but there was a sense of space and a sense of the universality of it, a kind of a landscape where ultimately Chuck Jones would do The Roadrunner. It's the only place to do it. You know, it just goes on and on. Life goes on. The Roadrunner keeps trying. I mean, the Coyote keeps trying. He keeps trying. The interesting thing about The Searchers is that when we saw Wayne's character in The Searchers, for us in 1956, coming out of the Cold War, we're still in the Cold War, coming from a fairly conservative working class family, though my father had been a Democrat, and Al Smith and Adlai Stevenson, but then in '56 voted for Eisenhower. So things had changed, and we were also becoming aware of a change in freedom of speech in America and in cinema. You had Otto Preminger, particularly Man with the Golden Arm. You had so many pictures coming out, Stanley Kramer's pictures, each of differing quality, but themes and ideas were being put up on the screen that weren't talked about, and you had this whole weird thing of, now you look at it, it's not weird now, of course, because it's post-war. What we call these darker movies, these gangster pictures, they weren't gangster films, they were noirs. And everybody was totally fatalistic in those films, of course, Out of the Past, and I saw that when I was about 4. We were just playing in the local theater. My aunt took me to see it. There were all these films, The Big Heat, Fritz Lang, and so many films building up to Kiss Me Deadly. So that, in a way, and particularly, and I'm sorry if I'm going about in a roundabout way talking about it, but in a way, in the world I lived in, that's the world I knew. I loved Westerns because, I lived in the city, tenements, and, I'd go to the theater and I'd see this big screen in color, or even in black and white was fine. You see those horses running, all those horses were wonderful, And the characters, the cowboys, and I should say the characters in the films really aren't always cowboys, but they were, particularly in Shane, which is one of my favorites. Shane is a good man, but he's a gunfighter. He's a very romantic character. The father, played by Van Heflin, is just as strong a man, the boy learns, ultimately, And it's a beautiful film, but that was the exception. And, I mean, I was used to seeing Westerns where the good guy and the bad guy, and I kind of like that. Which one?
Ethan Edwards in The Searchers.
Yeah, but you see, here was the difference. So the thing was, I was used to the good, the bad guy, and that sort of thing. I was used to the showdown in the street, the shootout, and in a way, I liked it. Where I came from, I got to tell you, the morality was such that, the word morality, I can't even use the word morality. It was a certain world where, it was almost feudal in a way. You had to be very careful. The respect was important. I saw people get hurt. I saw people disappear. I don't know. I just know that ultimately up on the screen, it was simpler. The landscape was vast. When people weren't on top of each other, there was still a chance of creating something new. They were in the process of creating a country, in a way, a whole new society. When we saw Ethan Edwards, I felt totally at home with him. This is the guy we know. We know this man. And besides which, I knew him from Red River. I hate to say this, but, my father and I got along very well over the years. And I was, got to enjoy a lot of my the work. He was acting in my movies and stuff towards the end. But, as a kid, for your father, you wanted Shane. But in a way, in my mind, in the worst parts of my mind, I sort of got like Ethan. I mean, he'd be mortified if he ever heard that now. But I don't mean that. I mean, in the darkest part of your mind, when things are really difficult, as you're growing up and the struggle between fathers and sons, I saw, my father up there. Maybe he took The Searchers as a way of pushing himself forward, and as a comeback in a way too, but also to explore new territory. And who is he? He's got his man there. He's got Wayne. When we started with in Stagecoach.
What is it about that? I mean, he worked on 14, 15 films with Wayne. You worked on 8 films with De Niro. What is it about that collaboration between the two?
It's a blessing. It really is. I got to say, because in the case of Bob and me, we're the same age. He was not a movie star. I was not a director of note at the time which we first worked together. And so we made the movie together with Harvey Keitel and everybody else, but we made the movie together. It was based on my life in the Lower East Side, my old friends, who, by the way, 1 or 2 of which had come to see The Searchers with me that night when we were 13 years old. We didn't have any, we were working. It wasn't making a movie with a movie star. And so when we came together on Taxi Driver, through Paul Schrader and Brian De Palma put us together, really, we also felt that something happened on that picture. Going back into Main Streets, De Niro had been in the same area where I grew up. And at the age of 15 or 16, he was sort of hanging out, quote unquote, with the different group of guys up by Hester Street or Grand Street, and we were on Elizabeth and Prince and that sort of thing. The groups didn't mesh that well, but we would see each other in after-hour clubs and places like that. And he was always a very sweet guy, from what I remember. And I just thought he was another neighborhood guy from further south, Hester Street. And so he knew the people or aspects thereof when I was doing in Mean Streets. So it was like, it was just suddenly, it was something that we both were formative. In a funny way, we had experienced formative experience time together, really. Our characters were formed right around that time, for better or for worse. And so we could always draw back on that. And we knew a gesture like that wouldn't be right. You know, if a knock on a door a certain way isn't right. A certain word isn't right, and also certain feelings couldn't be discussed. They were felt, they were understood. If they weren't understood between the two people, no amount of talking is going to make it work. And that's what we discovered on Taxi Driver, too. Although that had nothing to do with the old Italian-American neighborhood downtown. It had to do with something deeper and the outsiders. We were outsiders. We never fit in anywhere. I don't think he did. I only found that out later. I thought he was fine. I didn't know. I was this outsider, this asthmatic kid who was always like, to survive in the street, I had to sort of be comic relief for these tougher guys. So, you know, and you had to be careful. It was a very rough kind of thing for me. And as I say, it's a funny thing to talk about it that way, but because a lot of the young men who came out of that world and women are lawyers and work as bank presidents and everything, but there are others that weren't. I'm sorry, they just weren't. And some are gone. And you know, we were the outsiders. And I think that's where suddenly all that emotion that Schrader had put into that script of Taxi Driver came together in that Travis Bickle character, and all the negativity of the fantasy, and then crossing the line from fantasy into acting out the fantasy, the disaster, the catastrophe, you know, the apocalypse of being the loner. Now we're going to get you. Now we're going to take it out of you. Now we're going to get back. And I think that as young men, or boys maybe, we still were, this is all churning inside of us. And we never spoke that way about it, by the way. We never said anything. We understood the loneliness. We understood the rejection and the feelings of frustration. But I think with Ford and Wayne, you know, it's slightly different, I think, because it was more father-son, I would think, looking back. It's a different generation. Raoul Walsh discovered Wayne, and he put him in The Big Trail as Marion Morrison, I think. And, you know, I think, I don't know the story of how he finally got into Stagecoach, but I know he was doing all those B-Westerns during the 30s. And as Johnny Ringo, he goes from Johnny Ringo to Ethan Edwards to Frank Weed, you know, to, I forget the name of the character, but in Tantaya, in Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Now you have a progression. Not only do you have father and son, but you also begin, I think, to see a relationship of these two men in which ultimately somewhere in the middle, and I think it's around the 50s, after Fort Apache, right around, I think it's Searchers, where they kind of blend together. They become the same person. And I think the beauty of this whole thing with these two guys is that you have, you know, from the older way of looking back, you start, they're young men, they're full of optimism, and the creation of a world, the first half of the century, the fighting World War II, all of that sort of thing. And then you see them develop and grow into older men, reflective and melancholy.